It's now been 7.5 years since my divorce, and I just turned 40 last year. And what I can say looking back is that my divorce is one of the most significant and life defining transitions that I've gone through. Honestly, I did not think being a podcast host was on my bingo card, but here we are. I'm deciding now to create the resource that I wish existed 10 years ago when I was starting the divorce contemplation process. And selfishly, the podcast that I need right now to get the answers to the questions that I still have. And so I'm hoping that this will be a useful resource for you wherever you are in the process. Welcome to The Details with Allison Kahler, a space for real divorce stories and grounded conversations with experts, helping you find clarity and courage as you step into a future that may look different than you expected and better than you thought possible. Welcome to The Details and my first ever episode. Before I introduce you to the fabulous guests that I have lined up, I wanted to take a minute to introduce myself and to introduce the show. The Details is a place for stories, and I want to tell you a little bit about my story. I won't tell you the whole thing, but I'll give you a little bit of the Cliff Notes version today as we get started together. So my story starts all the way back in childhood, and I'll give you sort of 5 things to know about me before we get into my detail. So, thing number 1, I was born in Southern California, but I grew up in the western suburbs of Chicago in a town called Naperville. It was actually called the best place to raise your children in the US, like multiple times over. So it was a pretty idyllic childhood, even if it was a little bit sheltered, to be honest. The second thing, I grew up with 2 loving parents who are still together today and a younger sister who is my best friend today. I'm so lucky and so blessed to have them in my life as a great support system. Number 3, I grew up Catholic, and I actually went to Catholic school from junior high through high school and even through college. And that shapes a lot of my story, which I'll share more about at a later time. 4, I was super achievement oriented and total perfectionist. I was the one that would come home with report cards and, some A pluses and A's and, God forbid there was an A minus or a B plus, it would be the end of the world. And I think the perfectionism is best illustrated in a story going all the way back to when I was a really little kid, where I didn't want to ruin my coloring books as a little girl. So I would force my sister to trace the actual outline in the coloring book onto copier paper. And then we would color the copier paper and not in the actual coloring book, because I was so afraid of coloring outside the lines and ruining the coloring books that I wouldn't let us do it. So how's that for a metaphor in life of being afraid to color outside the lines? And last but not least, number 5, I grew up in the era of Nora Ephron romantic comedies. And I would watch Never Been Kissed and 10 Things I Hate About You and all of those movies from the 90s and early 2000s, and really wanted my happily ever after. So why do I share all of that context with you? So what I would say is I grew up pretty successful. I did well in school. I did well in sports, and I did pretty well in the first several years of my career. But one area that success, and I'm using air quotes if you're listening and not watching, one area that success eluded me was in love and in romance. And despite wanting my own version of a romantic comedy, I never seemed to find it. I was always the friend and never the girlfriend. And it wasn't until I was 24 years old and living in downtown Chicago that I met my first boyfriend. We met on the OG dating app, eHarmony, if you can believe it. And I fell in love super hard and super fast, as many first loves are. And we got engaged and we got married. And I thought I found my happily ever after. And unfortunately, I didn't. Just a couple days after my 33rd birthday and just shy of our 5th year wedding anniversary, I got divorced. It's now been 7.5 years since my divorce, and I just turned 40 last year. And what I can say looking back is that my divorce is one of the most significant and life-defining transitions that I've gone through. Yes, divorce is technically a one-day thing or a couple months as you think about the process that you go through to end a marriage. And yes, one day you're married and the next day you're technically divorced. But for me, it was and continues to be a 10-year transition. You see, I was contemplating divorce for about 2 to 3 years before the legal paperwork was done. And 7.5 years on the other side, I would say I'm still navigating what the divorce has meant for me and for my life. Following my divorce, I pretty much turned my entire life upside down. I moved from Chicago to Santa Monica, so back to my California girl roots, I guess you could say. I also left a nearly 20-year career in management consulting, and I got a puppy, which is a pretty big life transition for anybody who's gotten a puppy. But I've massively changed my life since my divorce, and through the process, I'm discovering who I am. Honestly, I did not think being a podcast host was on my bingo card, but here we are. I'm deciding now to create the resource that I wish existed 10 years ago when I was starting the divorce contemplation process. And selfishly, the podcast that I need right now to get the answers to the questions that I still have. And so I'm hoping that this will be a useful resource for you wherever you are in the process, whether you are in those early days of contemplating whether your marriage might be headed for a divorce, whether you're in the thick of it right now and negotiating and going through the legal side of things, or whether you're on the other side and still creating the next phase of your life. So, what makes me qualified to be a podcast host? First, to be clear, I am not a divorce expert. I'm not a family law attorney. I'm not a couples therapist. I don't work in the divorce space. Second, I am not a relationship expert. I have had exactly one serious relationship in my life. I have been married once, and I have been divorced once. I am not remarried. I am dating again, so I can share some updates on that as we go through, but I'm not a relationship expert. I am a former partner at a strategy consulting firm, and I spend most of my time now as an executive coach, which means two things. One, I'm a total data nerd and I love solving problems. And two, I'm totally curious about people and really good at asking questions and holding space for emotional conversations. I mentioned I'm a data nerd, so let's dig into some data, shall we? I'm going to share 3 statistics that are going to shock you. First, 1 in 4 married people have thought about divorce in the last 6 months. That means if you think of another couple that you know, if you're married, either you, your partner, the husband or the wife in the other couple, one of the 4 of you has thought about divorce in the last 6 months. Shocking statistic number 2. Over 40% of people don't tell anyone when they are contemplating a divorce. Yes, some people reach out to friends and family, but a lot of people don't open up to anyone. And shocking statistic number 3, 37% of people that have been thinking about divorce have been thinking about it for over 2 years. What this tells me about divorce is that for something that will ultimately impact 40 to 50% of married people, it is a long and lonely journey. And it makes me really sad and frankly pretty pissed. I cannot seem to reconcile the fact that if over 40% of people are getting divorced, that we feel so alone through the process. Personally, I did not open up to family and friends until I was months or even years into the contemplation process. The first people that I opened up to were some coworkers who I frankly didn't know very well at the time. It felt safer to tell them because there was less of a fear of ongoing judgment or criticism of me and my ex-husband if we ultimately did stay together. I'm grateful that now those coworkers have become some of my closest and dearest friends because they were there for me through the process. But these statistics really land home for me, and I want to do something about it. So I'm going to be a little vulnerable and open up with you guys. During the process, I was feeling all sorts of emotions. I felt ashamed. I felt guilty. I felt alone, as I said. And I felt afraid of so many things. I felt afraid that I was making a terrible decision. I felt afraid that I would regret this choice. I was afraid of being judged and criticized. And after never having had a relationship until this one, I was afraid I was giving up my one shot at love and my one shot at happiness. And I felt like a giant fucking failure. There, I said it out loud. Sorry for the F-bomb, but the achievement-oriented perfectionist failed. For one of the first times in my life, I failed and fell flat on my face. And so if you're hearing this and you're feeling any of those emotions, I want you to know 2 things, and listen to me very clearly here. First and foremost, you are not alone. And second, yes, you are normal. The feelings that you're feeling, the thoughts that you're thinking, it's all normal. So with that, let me tell you what you can expect from this show. The Details with Allison Kahler will have 3 types of episodes. The first are stories or details. The second are interviews with experts. And actually, sometimes there are hybrids between these two because many of the experts that I will be interviewing are actually divorced themselves, and that shapes how they show up and work with their clients. And the third type of episode are occasional solo episodes like this one. So let me tell you about the stories. Some of you may have resonated with what I started to share about my own divorce story, but many of you won't. Your circumstances will look different. So I want to bring you diverse perspectives and unique stories. I'll bring stories of people who, like me, got divorced when they were relatively young, and also stories of people who got divorced later in life. I'll bring you stories of women and men. I'll bring you stories of people that have children and people that don't. I'll bring you stories of people who were the ones that decided to get divorced, and stories from those who were blindsided and never saw it coming. I'll bring stories of people that have high conflict divorces, ones that have dragged on for years and got really expensive and messy. And I'll bring you stories of people who filed the paperwork on their own and it was done in a pretty easy, quick process. I'll also bring in stories that touch on themes of addiction, abuse, narcissism, and other mental health issues. And I'll also bring you stories of not divorce, stories of people that have decided to stay married, whether that meant recommitting to the marriage or redefining the terms by potentially opening up the marriage. And I may even bring a couple onto the show. We'll see. Many, many stories to come. As people share their stories, it's important to remember that there are multiple sides to every story. Stories are not necessarily facts, and we're not here to bring you the facts of the stories. Stories matter, though, because they're how we heal, they're how we learn, they're how we grow. So we'll be focusing on the lessons that we learn and the meaning that we make out of the divorce experience on the details. Personally, I've spent a lot of time reflecting on what I want to share about my own divorce story and how I want to share that. I thought about starting this podcast over 9 months ago, and I'm only now just doing it because I spent a lot of time last year actually reflecting on my story and how it's shaped me as an individual, the person that I've grown into, and the impact that it has on dating after divorce. And so I'm still writing my story, to be honest with you. I also have no intention of causing additional hurt or pain to my ex-husband or to his family or friends. And so I'm going to be really thoughtful about what I share and how I share it. And I know that my guests are planning on doing the same. And let's talk about the experts that we'll be interviewing now. So yes, we'll be interviewing sort of the obvious experts, the lawyers and the therapists that might support individuals as they're navigating the divorce process. But I'll also introduce you to a whole set of resources that I didn't even know existed when I was going through the divorce process. We'll talk to mediators. We'll talk to certified divorce coaches. We'll talk to CDFAs or certified divorce financial analysts, and a whole host of other individuals who are supporting people in the divorce space. One of the key themes that I want you to take away as you listen to these stories is that it's really about building a team of support around you as you navigate this really significant life transition. And yes, that'll include your family and friends and the people that are there to support you, but also a team of professionals who really do this on a daily basis. And then for fun, I'm also going to bring in some other experts, people that may not necessarily be divorce experts per se, but have a unique angle or perspective on how we grow and evolve during times of change like this. So stay tuned for more on that. One disclaimer that I'll share is that none of these guests are here to provide legal, financial, or therapeutic advice. It's purely for informational purposes only, and you should consult your own team of experts as you're making decisions through this process. Along the way, please tell me what kind of stories you want to hear, what kind of experts that you want to hear from. And if you want to share your own story, please reach out to me. I would love to have you as a guest on the details. In closing, I'm not coming to you here as an expert. I'm not even coming to you here as 100% healed. And I'm certainly not coming here to preach, to tell you what to do based on my experience. I am here to share a little bit about my story and to invite others to courageously share their stories. I'm also here to ask the questions that might be on your mind and on your heart. And I'm here to create a community so that you know that you don't have to go through this alone. We are in this together. One of my favorite authors, Brené Brown, said, "Owning our story and loving ourselves through that process is the bravest thing that we will ever do." Stories matter. I believe stories are sacred. They're how we make meaning out of life. The details exist to bring stories to the forefront. And I hope as you listen, you feel inspired to be the hero of your own story and to step into a future that may look different than what you imagined, but better than what you thought could be possible. Thank you for joining. I'm really glad you're here. Thanks for listening to The Details with Allison Kahler. If this episode resonated with you, be sure to follow the show wherever you listen to podcasts. And please consider sharing it with someone who might benefit from it. New episodes drop every Tuesday.